One of the most important qualities that you need to be able to demonstrate is trustworthiness. Trust is something that's critical not only to the relationships we have or our ability or capacity to be able to influence others, but trust is also important for our capacity to change. And in this episode of the Change Your Minds podcast, I'm going to walk you through the art and science of trust. We're going to dive into what is trust really about? And more than that, what are the specific things we can tangibly do to ensure that we increase the amount of trust we build with others, as well as our ability to be able to trust ourselves more effectively as well. This episode is going to be one of the most important topics that you can possibly look at in helping you to be able to drastically improve your ability to communicate with others, as well as communicate more effectively with yourself too. Trust me. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Change Your Mind podcast. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick, and today we are going to be talking about trust. And in particular, we're going to be looking at the art and science of trust, because to me, there's science behind trust, and we'll talk about some of the most important insights that we've gained from the study of what happens when people trust others. But we're also going to be looking at trust as an art form, because it's not necessarily true that you could just say things in a certain way that will guarantee that you will cultivate a sense of trust. In order for you to become trustworthy, there's an art form to it. And what I want to do is walk you through the most important elements. We'll talk about the neuroscience of trust. We'll explore the benefits of trust, why it matters so much. We'll look at how our brains are prediction machines and how that works. And most important of all, I'll walk you through the 10 most important qualities that are called the 10 C's of trust. And this is a framework that I built to ensure that we have a comprehensive checklist to be able to go, okay, what are ways that we can ensure that we're being as trustworthy as possible? And then finally, we're going to look at, well, how does this work when it comes to trusting yourself? Because one of the main reasons why we don't keep New Year's resolutions, and one of the main reasons why we're not very good at making the changes that we say we're going to make, or we're not very good at taking the actions that we say we're going to take, is largely because we've learned not to trust ourselves. So in this episode, we're going to be exploring it all. And I'd love to start by talking about some of the benefits to trust. So there's an obvious amount of different benefits that we can accrue as a direct result of cultivating trust with people. It obviously improves the quality of our relationships. Trust is critical in deeper relationships, in romantic relationships, in familial relationships, in terms of work relationships. The more trust you have, often the stronger that relationship will be. But it also helps us to be better performers. The more we trust each other, the more effective we can work as a team. The more people trust us, the more effective leaders we are, the more we're able to influence others, the more we're able to sell, the more likely people are to buy, the more likely people are to buy into what it is that we're saying, the more motivated, more inspired people are. Trust is one of those qualities that, should you become really good at it, it can completely transform how successful you are in terms of business. And in terms of life, the more trustworthy you are, the happier relationships are going to be, and the more likely you are to succeed, because you're going to have those relationships are going to be the very thing that enhances your capacity to be able to achieve a lot more of your goals. Trust allows you to resolve conflict more effectively. It creates more psychological safety. It allows you to cooperate better, and it also reinforces future trust as well. So there's so many different types of benefits. Not to mention, trusting yourself also helps you not only massively boost your confidence, but it also ensures that you're significantly more likely to be a high agency person, the kind of person that does the thing that they say they're going to do when they're going to do it. And that is a game changer for the area of behavioral change as well. So we're going to explore ways in which we can start to accomplish so many of those different types of benefits. And we'll start, before we get into any of that, by looking at the neuroscience of trust. And there's a neurochemical that's often connected with trust called oxytocin. And this is a hormone which is often associated with being the love hormone or the cuddle chemical. But really, it's massively connected to trust, because the more you trust someone, the more oxytocin is released into your mind, and therefore the more likely you are to be able to be open to their point of view. And so we're more likely to trust people the more oxytocin is released in our brain. And so it's really important for us to understand this, because as you're communicating with someone, it's not just a simple case of, I need to be trustworthy. It's a simple case of, the more trust you build with someone, the more you're triggering this chemical. So it's having an actual, meaningful, real physical impact upon their likelihood to be open to whatever it is that you have to say. And similarly too, negative emotions, whenever you fire up a person's amygdala, and that triggers a sort of flight or fight response. Now the amygdala responds not just to threats, or danger, but also response to opportunity. But oftentimes, whenever you trigger the release of chemicals like cortisol or adrenaline, or also known as epinephrine, norepinephrine, whenever these kind of chemicals are triggered, often that can make people a lot more tunnel focused. And as a result, it can also make it less likely that we experience the oxytocin of trust. Whenever we're stressed, we're more hypervigilant, and therefore we're less likely to trust in other people. We're less likely to respond favorably, because a lot of times in our brain, the way in which we cultivate a sense of trust is there's a part of the brain called the temporal parietal junction, where we're really starting to look at the ability we have to understand the social networks that we engage in with others. We're looking at trying to be able to understand what other people are thinking. We have the ability or capacity to be able to put ourselves in other people's shoes to figure out, is this person on my side? Is this person someone that I can trust? Is this person somebody that will help me in this way? And under high threat, whenever we feel like we might be in danger, we become more suspicious and less responsive to trustworthy signals. So therefore, it's even more important that we cultivate a sense of trust by creating psychological safety in a person. So there's a sort of a two-way process. On the one hand, the more trust you create, the more psychological safety a person will experience. Therefore, the more open they'll be. But on the other hand, the more open they will be, the easier it is for you to create trust. And so since we necessarily want to be as good as possible and being able to cultivate trust, that's why it's not just always a case of demonstrating your credibility, for instance. It's about making them feel a certain way as opposed to just giving them information as to why you're the person to listen to. So building trust is not enough to give them the logical reasons why they should trust you. You have to find a way to be able to trigger the way in which they feel so that they feel like they can trust you. That's the critical piece. And so this brings us to how trust works in terms of the brain. And so our brains are effectively prediction machines. And the more confident that the brain feels that it can predict what's going to happen, the more likely it is to trust that scenario. And this is particularly important because in many ways, when you interact with people, you are affecting their predictions. So if you do something for a person and you're always reliable for them, they will start to form a prediction of you. If I ask this person to do this, then they're going to do it. And that will make them more likely to trust you. So the more you demonstrate that you are someone they can make accurate predictions with, the more likely you are to cultivate a sense of trust. But on the other hand, if you let them down, if you cancel plans at the last minute, if you say you're going to do something but you don't do it, it can be difficult for them to trust you because they never know whether or not you're going to fulfill the prediction. And that's particularly critical. So it's really vital for us to recognize that the reason why people do or don't trust you is largely because of how they feel. And that feeling is based upon their capacity or ability to make predictions that will come true. And so with that in mind, let's talk about 10 different elements of trust, 10 different behaviors or qualities of trust that all make you more trustworthy. And I'm going to call these the 10 C's of trust. And the first C is consistency. And this speaks to the importance of being reliable, doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. Consistency is a trust multiplier. It makes it so that the other person is much more likely to increase how much they trust you. If every single time you make a promise to someone, you fulfill it, and you do so at the time deadline that you give it, over time, they'll start to cultivate a deep sense of trust for you because you're so reliable, you're so consistent. They'll feel, I know that if I ask this person to do this, they're going to follow through. And so following through, being reliable, even being consistent in the sense of being the same person today as you were yesterday, not turning up with vastly different personality traits each time you meet someone. The more consistency you give a person, the easier it is for their predictive brain to predict what's going to happen, to predict what you're going to do. And therefore, as a result of that, they're much more likely to go, okay, this person I can trust. Why? Because you're demonstrating consistency. That's the first C. So the question for you would be, what are the promises you can make that you know and guarantee that you'll be able to deliver on? So try to avoid making promises that rely on outside forces and make only promises that you know 100% you can fulfill. And by doing so, on following up, by being reliable, by being consistent, you're much more likely to cultivate a sense of trust. The second C is clarity. And this is to do with the way in which we communicate with others. Clarity and clear, open communication makes it easy for people to understand exactly what is expected, exactly what the goals are, and exactly what the constraints are. And so whenever you're communicating, be very clear about your expectations, be very clear about what you're saying, be very clear about your messaging, be very clear about the challenges that you find yourself facing or the constraints. The more clear you are that exactly what's going on, exactly what they need to know, exactly what is it that you're looking to accomplish, the more you reduce that ambiguity, the less likely you are to trigger the sort of the cortisol or the stress hormones, and the more likely you are to create a psychological safety. Because the more safe people feel, the more clear people feel, the more relaxed people are, and the more open people are. So clear, transparent, open communication is critical if you want to cultivate trust. So once again, whenever you're communicating with someone, if you want to be able to build trust, ask yourself the question, what is it that I'm trying to say here? What are the most important things I want to get across? What is the clearest way to be able to communicate this? What is it that I want from this particular conversation? How can I clearly communicate that? What are the expectations I want to set for this person? And remember, in order for you to be reliable or consistent, you have to be able to fulfill the expectations they have, which means you need to be able to articulate those expectations as effectively as possible and as clearly and as cleanly as possible. So get into a habit of ensuring that when you're communicating, you are doing so with utmost clarity. Next, we have being candid. And this is really about being honest, being straightforward with people. Whenever you are honest with another person, when you demonstrate honesty, and it's easy to demonstrate honesty when you're talking about things that are innocuous or don't matter that much. But when you're honest about some of the tough stuff, that is the kind of thing that will win you a lot of favor. Now, it's important when you're being candid that you're not being cruel, that you're not just directly spitting out the truth in a way that might be hurtful to them. You want to ensure that the candid nature of your communication is honest, but honest in a sort of an empathetic way. Because when you're communicating in a candid way, when you're giving people the straight talk, explaining the way it is, but you're doing so in a caring way, people are much more likely to trust you because you're telling them the truth. And we all crave to ensure that the person that we're talking to is telling us the truth. From the time we evolve, we have to figure out, who do we trust? And one of the qualities that is most important for trusting someone is, are they honest? Are they straight up with us? Now, when they're straight up with us, we need to make sure that that's true. And the more what they say becomes true, or we recognize they're being honest, even if it means that they're sacrificing something, like if you're doing sales and you're honest about a weakness in your particular product, that demonstrates to the other person, this person is being honest above everything else, that this person has integrity. Therefore, from a prediction standpoint, I can predict with more accuracy that this person is legit. And this particular person is the kind of person that I need around me. Therefore, I can trust what they have to say because they're being candid. So we have consistency, we have clarity, and we're being candid. The next one is care. And remember, care is important to balance with candid and being candid, because care is whenever people feel like your intentions are pure, when you're coming from the right place, when you're demonstrating a sense of warmth, when you're demonstrating a positive intention, you genuinely want to help people. Some of the research suggests that warmth actually beats demonstrating competence at first. So in other words, it's even more important that you demonstrate you got good intentions and you care than it is that you demonstrate you're an expert in the early part of any sort of relationship. You want to come to the table with empathy, listening to them, with having positive intention. That's even more important at the beginning in most cases than demonstrating expertise and competency, which is something that I think most of us are sort of very acutely aware of. So what we want to be able to do is ask ourselves the question, how is it that we can demonstrate care? How can we demonstrate we genuinely care? How can we demonstrate a positive intention? How can we build this sense of warmth to ensure that we're cultivating trust? When you start to think through how you can start to build that, you're much more likely to cultivate a sense of trust in the folks that you talk to. And that's a really important element. The next C is congruence. And this really is about how congruent are your body language, your tone of voice, your facial expressions, your words. In other words, how authentic are you? How can people trust that you are who you say you are, that you're being completely congruent, completely aligned with your message? You're not pretending one thing and actually faking it. You're being real. The more congruent, the more real, the more authentic you are, the more likely people are to actually believe you. Why? Because you are demonstrating with all signals that you're saying effectively the same thing. If you say, yeah, we can do it, but you don't sound convinced, then people are not going to trust that. You need to demonstrate with conviction, both internal and external. You need to make sure that how you feel and what you think is aligned with how you express that. And the more you do that, the more real you are, the more authentic you are, the more congruent you are, the more likely you are to cultivate a sense of trust. So make sure that your inner messaging and your outer messaging is aligned. Make sure that you are being yourself in those interactions. And as a result of that, you're going to cultivate a deeper sense of trust. Next, we have competence. This is really about demonstrating expertise. You know what you're talking about. You have the information available. You've got experience in this. You've been around this roundabout before. You know how to handle challenges. You're a safe pair of hands. You're the kind of person they can trust because of your expertise. Once again, it's not as important necessarily sometimes as demonstrating being warm and having a positive intention and care at the beginning piece, but it does become very quickly extremely important. And so this is demonstrating your competence. And this isn't always about just being great. It's also about how can you ensure that they know your track record? How can you discuss case studies or examples or stories? How can you discuss testimonials or qualifications or endorsements? What is it that you can do to ensure that they know that you know what you're talking about? What is it that you can do to ensure that they know how skilled you are, how experienced you are, how successful you are, in a way that doesn't come across like you're bragging? So once again, you want to be able to be congruent. You want to be able to demonstrate care. You want to be able to demonstrate competence, but to balance it out in a way that ensures you're putting across that message. So consider how you can demonstrate competence, both not just in how you work or how you speak, but also in terms of how you position yourself through the examples you give with the stories that you tell in that context as well. The next C is confidence, and this is something that is really to do with how you demonstrate through your body language, through your tone of voice. Usually confidence, if you use downward inflection in your tone of voice, that demonstrates a sense of certainty or conviction, which makes you come across more confident. Your facial expression as well, eye contact, your body language, all of this indicates a sense of confidence, as does your word choice. If you're hedging bets and saying, I think maybe the possibility is we might consider the option, well, that's not going to sound very confident. But if you say, look, we'll definitely look at how we can absolutely, completely, for sure, achieve this particular insight, then the more that you're clear and distinct and strong with your language, the more likely you are to cultivate a sense of confidence. So you can do an audit on this. You can go, how is my body language when I'm communicating? What about my facial expression? What about my tone of voice? Am I using too much upward inflection? Or am I demonstrating a lot of conviction with how I'm communicating? And then what about the way in which I'm articulating myself? Am I using language of certainty and definitiveness? Or am I hedging my bets a bit, which can take away from the area of confidence? Then we have confident vulnerability. On the one hand, you want to be able to demonstrate your competence. But on the other hand, you also want to be able to come to the table with questions, demonstrating that you're also aware that you don't have all the answers. You don't know everything there is to know. A lot of times you want to be able to really add value to the other person or make a difference. But whether it's dating or whether you're in terms of sales, consultative selling, you want to be able to make it so that when you're communicating with the other person, you come to the table with just as many questions as you have answers. So you don't pretend that you're the smartest person in the room. You're in the room with them and you're trying to learn from them, about them, so that you can ensure that you're connecting with them in the most effective way. And so the key with confident vulnerability is that you're confident about what you do know, but you're also confident about what you don't. You're confident about what questions you have. So you're confident about being vulnerable. It's not just about being vulnerable where you're like, uncertain or unclear and you're stumbling through your words. I'm not sure if I could do this. You're demonstrating confidence, but you're also aware that you don't have all of the knowledge, all of the information. And by demonstrating that balance, it ensures that you're cultivating a deeper sense of trust because people know, okay, this person isn't pretending to be perfect, but at the same time, they're confident enough about what they do and about what they don't know. Number 9, the C here is connection. And this is really about cultivating a sense of connection with the person. Whenever you create a connection with someone, whenever you build what Robert Cialdini would call the principle of unity, where you find ways of highlighting the groups that you both are part of, or your shared collaborative purpose, what villain you're both trying to overcome, what challenge you're both trying to deal with, what purpose you're both motivated towards, what familial grouping or identity grouping or group identity you both share. Whatever it is that you could do to cultivate a sense of unity, unity tends to promote trust through connection, because the more you connect with others, the more they see is they're just like me, or they're on my team, or they're on the same inverted commas side as me, the more likely they are to trust you. So once again, consider how can you demonstrate a sense of connection with another person? How can you promote this unity and cultivate a sense of unity? And then finally, collaboration. Collaboration is, in one way, a way to be able to build more unity or connection, but it also stands apart on its own as well, because the more you collaborate with someone, the more you're sort of cultivating a relationship based upon action. And collaborating with someone means you're also helping them and they're helping you. And the more you help them, the more they like you. And the more they like you, the more they trust you. And so helping them also means getting help from them, because the research shows that whenever someone is helpful to you, they'll also like you more. Why? Because in order for them to justify to themselves, why am I helping this person? They're going to be looking to their behavior and they're going to recognize that, well, I must be helping this person because I like them. So it works in great ways. The more you collaborate with someone, the more you work well with someone, the more likely you are to build a deeper sense of trust. So a great idea would be to ask yourself, instead of how can I ask this person to do this for me, how can I collaborate with them? How can I bring them into the process? How can I make us both part of the team that allows us to work towards this particular outcome? The more we think about collaborating with other people, the deeper we will build a sense of trust. So if we're going through the 10 C's, we've consistency. Again, how can you be more reliable? Clarity, how can you clearly communicate expectations, goals, and what's going on? Candid, how can you be straight up with people? Care, how can you demonstrate warmth and positive intention? Congruence, how can you be more authentic and real with people? Competence, how you can demonstrate your expertise, your knowledge, your experience, your wisdom. Confidence, how can you demonstrate through your way of communicating that you feel confident and you've lots of conviction? Confident vulnerability, how can you demonstrate that you're confident about what you do know as well as what you don't know? Connection, how can you demonstrate a sense of unity and build trust that way? And finally, collaboration, how can you work effectively with other people? If you can just go through that checklist and start to work through how you can start to apply each of those and answer those questions, you'll find yourself in a much better position to be able to cultivate a deeper sense of trust. And so we've got one more piece to the puzzle here, and that's all great for communicating trust with others. But what about trusting yourself? And so there's two elements of trusting yourself. The first is trusting yourself means trusting that you have what it takes, trusting that you can achieve something. And that means betting on yourself. Again, remember, your brain's a prediction machine. So it's going to make a prediction, can I do this? And whenever you're trying to answer that question, your brain will kick off what I call inner propaganda, which will prevent you from sometimes believing in yourself in that case. But believing in yourself requires that you make certain declarations to yourself, things that you bet on yourself. And that means being able to be good at knowing what are you going to say to yourself? How are you going to communicate to yourself about your capacity, about your ability? And so the first thing to be able to do is to recognize that whenever you bet on yourself, you're not betting yourself, it's not always a sure bet. It's not a guarantee that you're going to be successful. But when you bet on yourself, you're making a declaration. This is what I believe I'm capable of. And then you put yourself to the test and you say, I'm going to do everything I can to achieve that. So you set yourself an ambitious goal that pushes you forward, that drives you in that way. Well, by setting that goal and by telling yourself, this is what I need to be able to go after, you're making a bet as to whether or not you can achieve this. And the difference between this and what most people do is most people, they evaluate whether or not they think that they have what it takes. They go, I don't know if I have what it takes. Well, my argument would be, you'll only know if you have what it takes if you give it 100%. And so if you want something enough, and you have even a fraction, a bit of evidence that suggests that there might be a chance, a small chance that you could achieve it, and you really want to be able to go after it, then give yourself every opportunity. In other words, the only way to figure out whether or not you have what it takes is to give yourself as much effort and energy as possible to go after it, to really do whatever it takes. Because so often we write ourselves off before we've even had a chance to be able to make a real effort. So to bet on yourself, decide what is it that you want to accomplish, and then figure out what is it that I would need to do in order to achieve that. As opposed to, have I got what it takes? The only way to find that out is through action, not through thought. We can't just think and go, oh, I don't have what it takes. It's action that will allow you to know whether you have what it takes. So you do everything you possibly can in order to particularly achieve it. And by doing so, you put yourself in a much better position as a result. So that's one of the most important elements to being able to trust yourself and building confidence. There's one other area, and this is to do with creating change. And there's 4 of the C's that we talked about earlier that is particularly relevant when it comes to trusting yourself. And that means when you're communicating with yourself, the first thing is you need to be candid with yourself. This really translates to what we call self-awareness. Being honest with yourself about what you do know, about what you don't know. Now, this doesn't mean limiting yourself. It means recognizing your current state of play. What are you good at? What are you not good at? And what is it that the gap between where you are and where you want to be looks like currently? That's what I mean when I say candid. The second piece is consistency and reliability. And this means making sure that you do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. And this is the most important element. The reason we fail with New Year's resolutions, the reason people don't successfully change habits is largely because they don't trust themselves. When they say, oh, I'm going to go on a diet, they never follow through. I'm going to lose this amount of weight, they never follow through. If you want to create change, you need to start to become the kind of person that when you say it to yourself, you do it. You don't bullshit yourself. You do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. And that means not making promises to yourself unless you're 100% committed. It means be more careful with the promises you make. Be more careful with the goals that you set. Be more careful with the changes that you declare that you're going to make. And when you do make them, raise the stakes. This is critical, that whatever you say you're going to do, and if that means making small micro wins, right, easier, smaller wins to accomplish, that's what you do. And you build momentum that way. But it means start treating yourself as if you're promising someone else something. Pretty much most of us will feel bad if we promise someone something and then we renege on it. Start to feel bad in the same way towards yourself. It's critical because you want to become the kind of person that when you say you're going to do something, you actually follow through. Then we also have clarity. This means get your thinking clear. Be clear about what your expectations are. Be clear about what you want. Be clear about what you need to do to get there. Be clear about what questions you have. A large part of clarity comes with the questions you ask. So start to become better at prompting yourself, what I call brain prompting, asking yourself smarter, better questions. And then finally, demonstrating care, right? That means self-love, treating yourself with compassion. So on the one hand, you want to be able to be relentless with yourself and not allow yourself off the hook and go, oh, well, I was going to do this, but then this happened. Make it so that when you make a promise to yourself, you push forward and do everything you can to achieve that. And get clear about exactly what you want, clear about your expectations. But at the same time, recognize that no matter what you do, you're still worthy. You still matter. And give yourself that care. And as the balance between the care and the consistency, you want to make sure, like, if you have a child, you want to make sure that you're building that child up to the point where that child is disciplined enough to be able to take the actions that allows them to be successful and happy in their life. But at the same time, you never want them not to feel loved. So you want to be able to create that balance with yourself too. You want to nurture and nourish yourself with both the love on the one hand, but also with the discipline and the consistency on the other hand to ensure that you're moving forward. Critical stuff. So again, from a self point of view, you want to make sure you're candid with yourself, being self-aware. You demonstrate consistency and be reliable. Do what you say you're going to do to yourself. Clarity, make sure you're clear about what you want, where you are, what you need to accomplish, what you need to do. And then finally, care, make sure you're demonstrating self-love and caring for yourself and really wanting the best for you all the way through. The more you do this, the more likely you are to be able to make the changes that you want to have happen, and the more you're likely to be able to turn your life around. So I really hope you found this episode useful. We're going to pack in tons of stuff relevant towards cultivating a deeper sense of trust. But for now, I'm Owen Fitzpatrick. Thank you very much for watching. May the force as always be with you, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye for now.